Hey guys, welcome to my first ever art lesson, and my first video is about teaching you the absolute basics of painting. So we're going to start with my personal favourite paint, watercolours. As you can probably see in the name, this paint is activated by water. This is my favourite palette. The blocks of paint look really small, but a really small amount of watercolours go a long way because the colours are so intense. But yeah, the reason why I really like watercolours is because it can act like acrylic, it can act like ink, you can build it up, you can dilute it down, and you know, for me, because of its versatility, you have more control over your medium, so that's really cool. And in terms of the type of brush, when using watercolours, you genuinely need quite a soft brush, and that's because obviously when you're painting with it, you'll have a lot of water in your paintbrush. When I go to the art shop and I'm painting with watercolours, I like to have a little feel. If I know I'm doing a specific painting, I'll always feel the brush in the art shop before I buy it, so I kind of know how it's going to perform. And if you're looking for a watercolour brush, you kind of want to feel a softer end. Now I'm going to show you different ways different brushes paint with watercolours. So here's my soft brush. I'm going to dip it into water. The more water you use with watercolour, the more transparent your colour is going to be. So let's test out the red. Now let's see what happens when we add water. Can you see the way the colour's kind of bleeding into the paper here? Now let's see what happens when I add a lot of water to this red. So I'm just going to use part of my palette here to quickly mix some diluted colour. And it comes out very transparent. The good thing about watercolour is it's always buildable, so let's say I'm not happy with this colour, I can always go in with more red. And because it's still wet, it kind of bleeds into my original shade. What a lot of people like to do before they use watercolours is wetting their paper beforehand. When your paper's wet and when your paper's dry, your watercolours have a totally different effect. And let me show you the difference. So if you can see the edges, this is starting to bleed into the paper, whereas this one's still quite solid. So again, it all depends on what kind of effect you're trying to get. And this one you can kind of work on with more water and it will then bleed more. But that's the beauty of watercolours. It kind of does its own thing if you let it. But then, like here, you can see you've got full control when your paper's dry. So now let's see how to blend with watercolours. Let's blend this red into yellow. When I'm blending colours, I like to have two separate paintbrushes. Let's start off with red. Another thing I like doing when I'm painting is having a cloth with me, because let's say I've got a bit too much paint on my brush, I can kind of just dab it on my cloth. So let's go with red. On the point of where I want to blend it, I add a little bit of water. Now, let's get the perfect yellow. whatever color is a little bit darker has more control when it comes to blending, because I can overlap this red onto the yellow easily, but I can't quite do that with the yellow. A little bit rough, but that is how you blend with watercolors. So what I quite like to use with watercolors is gouache paints, and they have very similar properties of watercolors, and I think they're like cousins because they are also activated by water and they do the exact same thing, but they're just not solid, and I guess they've got the same sort of texture as acrylic, not quite as fluid, but similar. I can just use that like acrylic, like a solid color, or I can water it down. The more water I add, the more transparent it becomes. Same with watercolors. When it comes to blending colors with gouache, whatever the hell you call these things, it is the same sort of principle. I've red. See that bleeding quite nicely into the colour because it's very wet. See how cool that is? It kind of just expands on its own. You can see the way it does its own thing, which is why it's such a cool medium to work with. You can really play around with it. You could even get a sponge. Now, when it comes to creating detail with watercolors, you can actually use acrylic brushes. So now, creating detail with watercolors and gouache paints, you can do this the same way, because like I said, they are very similar. These are my very fine brushes. This one's a softer one. So let's get the red. So, acrylic, the brushes I would use for acrylic are much harder. What's good about acrylic is you can layer it. So even if I had black, I could still go over it with white, and with a few layers, the white would be a solid color. So as you can see, it's a lot drier, it's a lot thicker, but it gives you more, it gives you a solid color, but it's not quite as versatile as watercolors. But if you do add a bit of water, you can water it down and blend it out, but it's not activated by water the same way watercolors are, obviously. This is dry enough. Let me show you how you can put white over black. There you can see I can put this white over this black as long as it's dry. And let me show you what happens when you do that with watercolor. let's try and get a white on this watercolor black. As I'm painting, it's starting to mix in with the black. Now let's go back to our acrylic. It does not mix in with the original black we painted. And I'd say another layer, we'd have a really bold white. But that's not a problem because we can still get a white over a watercolor. We just would need to use less water. So this is the gouache without me dipping my brush into the water. Let's just use this. So that's the trick to layering. With watercolors, if you do want to layer a lighter color on top of a dark color, you need to use less water so that the pigment is not watered down. And that's the principle for every light color that you want to put onto a dark color. So let's say I want to add a yellow heart onto this red. Now if I just go ahead and add yellow on top of this, it's not as solid or as bright as it could be. If you want to layer any color on top of a color that's darker than the one that you want to paint with, you need to always start with white. White brings you back to the brightness of the paper. So let's draw a heart in the white. Already you can see that the white pops way more than the yellow. Now let's see the difference of going in with the white first. Huge difference. As acrylic is a little bit thicker, how do we blend with acrylic paint? Let's say I want to blend this creamy color into black. Bearing in mind, acrylic dries very fast, so you do kind of have to work fast. So, because the paint's wet, it's blending really nicely. As you can see, it has a very different blend to how watercolor blends. That's one way. Get a kitchen sponge, tear it off a little bit. Test out the texture before you go ahead and do it. That is blending with acrylics. And you can also get these two types of blending with the gouache paints. Oh, $17.50, not much of a bargain. The next thing is ink. It's similar to watercolor in the way it reacts. See how the ink really dances in the water. And I love working with ink. I usually get around 6 or 7 pots of water when I'm using ink, and I'm going to show you why. This is all dry, so this doesn't matter. So, first thing you do when you're painting with ink, you create your little small color palette. This pot has no water, none at all. These three have more or less the same amount of ink in them, but I'm going to add different amounts of water in each one. And that is how we're going to create our palette for different shades of our ink. The next thing I do is I create a reference. is the colour chart I've made for my inks. This being the darkest, these 3 medium shades, and these 2 are the lightest. When you're making a painting with ink, this is what you refer back to. So I'm going to explain how to use your little chart that we made for ink painting. So let's imagine this is the picture that I want to paint. First, I need to turn it to black and white. You can do this loads of ways, but I'm using Photoshop. So you go to your adjustments and click black and white. Then this will appear and you just press OK. Now hit image, adjustments, brightness and contrast. What I like to do is increase the contrast so I can see all the different shades more clearly. Now get your shade chart and you're able to see your darkest points, your midpoints and your highlights. So let's say you wanted to create a highlighted area with your ink. I like to use Gouache for this. It works really nicely with the ink. The thing about inks is you can't layer. You can't go back in yourself. So if you've done a darker color, then go in with a lighter shade, it's not going to make a difference. So what you then need to do is go in with something with a bit more pigment, and then you can then do a highlight. You can even use white acrylic depending on how bold you want your highlight to be. So I hope you found that helpful. Those are just the basics, and I will later do more detailed videos about each medium. Now it's just time to try all of them or one of them and see what you come up with. I'd love to see your paintings, so send me whatever you've painted through to my Insta, and I'm going to post it on my next video. Peace.